Hi guys! I'm in this video! Magically, sort of. Thanks to tech support from my husband, who has me with several cameras going at once. Plus, I can show the image I'm working from down there at the same time that I work on an image here. So, welcome to the first watercolor class. And I feel a little bit weird because, like I'm looking here, but then it's like the camera that's looking at me is over there, which is not normally the case. Anyway, here we go. I've got my supplies ready. I've got my brushes. I've got a couple of extra brushes here. This is an example of something similar to what we're going to be working on today. The sunset, it can look really amazing, and also at the same time it's not really as hard as you might think to create an amazing sunset, because it has more to do with, like, you slap the colors on there and it's like, oh, it works. Okay, so so we're gonna do this. We're gonna start off with this today, and I cleaned my palette. Oh, okay. So I've got my palette, I've got water, I've got some tissue, and you may want to make sure you've got some tissue as well so that you can wipe off any extra water from your brushes. And another thing I'm going to do today before actually doing the watercolor is a little warm-up exercise with remembering, oh yes, this is how watercolor works. These are some of the things that it can do. First, I am going to do how much water versus how much pigment that you want to load onto your brush. So depending on how dark you want some part of the image to be, you have either more water on your brush or you have more pigment on your brush. So you might already know that. And then another tip, of course, too, is that if you want it darker, you may need to have several layers to make it as dark as you want, because this is a couple of layers of paint on those trees here. And the image that I'm working from down there, there's not trees on those. That's a different photograph. It has little buildings in there. I thought, oh, that's really cute too. So I'm going to use that as the image. Okay. This exercise, you don't have to have the paper taped down to do. But when you have the picture, the sunset for today, then you will want that one taped down. And I've got a separate piece of paper here that's taped down. So, ta-da! 1, 2. And here we go. I'm going to choose a darker color for this, and I will use my medium-sized brush because I think that's the easiest one to use for showing this and for practicing it. So I will choose a dark color. It doesn't really matter what color, because you're just thinking about how much water versus how much pigment. So I'm not going to pick that yellow. That's going to be way too light. It's harder to see the difference with the yellow. This green always comes up really well for me, but I'm going to use my dark blue. Doesn't matter what color you use though. Okay, so I need a little water on my brush. And first I'm going to brush it over the color a lot. And I don't want too much water on my brush. I'm just going to get a lot of the pigment on there. Enough that I can definitely see it on my brush, but you can't really see that very well. No. Oh, but it got on my fingernail, so you know it's on there. Okay. And the proof will be, it will show up here. So Plenty, plenty, plenty. And when I make the brush stroke, it will be dark. And you can start with that. Try that out. Also, another thing is, as I'm going along, if I move a little too quickly, because this is a video, I don't have to pause it for certain things, but you can click pause whenever I'm moving on to the next thing and you're like, but wait, I didn't get there yet. Okay, and you'll notice that with this, you may get some parts where it doesn't completely cover the paper because there's so much pigment on there and there's not as much water, so it doesn't suck into the paper quite as much. Okay, so I've got a lot of pigment. Now I'm going to try put a little bit of water on my brush, and I'm not adding any more pigment, but I'm adding a little bit of water, and do another brush stroke next to it. I think you can even see it here where this one is lighter than this one. Okay, and then we'll try again. I'm going to add a little bit more water. Notice that technically I'm just adding water, right? If I'm not adding any more pigment, but I am adding more water, then it's more water in the brush and less pigment in the brush, so it should come out lighter. Okay, again, a little bit of water. It's getting more liquidy. And keep going. If there's too much water on your brush, you can brush some off. Dip and brush. It's getting lighter. Dip. I might have to dip a little bit more in here so that I move it a little faster and it will get lighter a little bit faster. Okay, dip. I think I will continue it partly down into here as well. Dip. I'm going to give it a full dunk right there so that it gets a lot lighter. Okay, and then really dunk that in there. Okay. If you used a color that wasn't quite so dark, you might be done now, and you might not have any more steps to go. Really dip it. Oh, I'm going to swish it around in there. Okay. Oh, but I still have a little color, which of course I already knew. Okay, now I'm really going to try to take a lot of that color out of my brush because I'm almost at the end, and yeah, I think that will be my last one. I've just got a little bit of color and you can kind of see it here. Okay. But that also shows that if you're cleaning your brush, you really got to swish it around in there good before all the color comes out, especially if you have a lot of dark color on your brush, then it will really stick in the bristles. Okay, so another thing to think about is whether you paint over a color that's wet or if you paint over a color that's dry, it will be different. And I've saved a little space over here. We can do wet into wet and wet into dry. So I think I'll use this space for the wet into wet, and then see some of these will already be dry. It's not really shiny anymore. The paper has already absorbed the water, and I didn't really have a lot of water up here anyway. So if you have another color and you put it over one that is dry, then it doesn't mess up that color too much, right? Like if you want that shape, the color to stay there, then it should stick down and it should stay there. But if you have something that's wet and you keep trying to add more, add more, add more in, then it's like, why is this not working? It's, it's the some of the color is being picked back up into the brush and it's not making it darker. Oh, I need to wait for it to dry and then put the other in there. Or, why is it all spreading out? I didn't want the color to spread together. Oh, I have to wait for it to dry. Okay, so I'm going to pick a color that's totally different from the blue. Let's see, I will pick this red. Nice red here. A little bit of that, and oh, you can actually see the difference a little bit here. That color was still wet. Here, let me get closer. And it might focus. Oh yes, great. Here you can actually see that the edge of this line is slightly blurry on this one. But remember, this brush stroke was still slightly wet. And so that's what happens. It will start to blur together. This one and this one are more dry. So when I brush over it, it has a crisp edge on there. It does not blend together, but the two colors are now layered over each other, so visually it can blend. When you stand back a ways, then it's like, oh, okay, it's the two together. And red and blue should make purple, right? Should, but with the layer, I think it looks more red than purple still. Okay, now I'm going to do a wet into wet area, which works well if I have a very wet color. So I'm going to grab some of a color. It won't really matter which one, but I make sure I've got plenty of water to go with it, but enough color too, otherwise it's like, oh, I can't see it. Oh, I need more water. That's too dry. Water, water, water. Okay, so that is definitely wet right now. Then I clean my brush really well so that I could pick up the other color that I want, which I am going to pick. I'm going to pick yellow. We'll see if it should show up. And for this, I'm going to keep it fairly dry and load up on that yellow. Let's see. Spread out. Okay. It's not going to spread too much yet, but what happens if I put a little more water on my brush with my yellow? Sound effects. Okay, it really blooms out. The more water that both of the colors have, if this is still wet and it has a lot of water and it's really soggy wet, and this also has a lot of water, see, it will really spread out. This will kind of spread out still, but that really spreads out quite a bit more. Okay, and this is something to think about with today's painting, because when working on clouds in the sky, it can be nice not to have super hard edges. You can have hard edges. You can wait for one layer to totally dry. But there's nice things that happen with watercolor, with allowing it to bleed into the other color to create the clouds. So some of this you can see where I really didn't have the paper all that wet, and then it didn't do that. And then so the other thing then is, well, what about the ground? The part that you don't want to have blend into the sky, you have to wait for the sky to be dry enough, or else it will blend into it. And for parts of it, I didn't wait till it was totally dry here. I can wait until it's totally dry, but I didn't wait until it was totally dry, and then it's a little fuzzy on some of the edges on here, and that is why. Okay, we are ready. We are ready for our painting, and it's going to be based on this picture here. And now I have my paper ready. Let's see, I need to back up just a bit. Try to get it in a good place, nice and big. Okay, I think that will do it. So, step 1, we're going to need a wet sky. And I'm only going to leave a little bit of room for the ground. You really can just wet the whole thing and then start painting into it. So this will be to start with wet on wet. It's best to use your mop brush, the big brush, for wetting it, because otherwise, you use your smaller brush and it's tedious and you're like, it's drying out too quickly now. Oh no. Okay. I'm going to use the brush that can hold the most amount of water and make it nice and soggy. And don't worry about, saving a little piece for the ground, because that's going to be darker anyway. So if I just let that sky dry and then paint over it, it's fine. It would be a problem if that area was supposed to be lighter than the other part I'm doing underneath. But with watercolor, it goes light to dark because the white is the paper. Okay, if you want to check to see whether you've got it all, if it's all nice and wet, you can tip your paper and see, is it shiny? Oh, see, I can see this in here. If I tip my paper on the screen, you can see it's like, oh, it's shining everywhere. Okay, that means it's good and wet. Okay, so now that my paper is wet and it's going to try to wrinkle up, I can think about what are the first colors that I would like to have in there. I think I'll start with some yellow way at the bottom, and I'll use my large brush for this. If I don't get enough yellow on the first pass around, I can add more. It's fine. Okay. I feel like I should be able to show me getting the color a bit. There, I'm going to put that there. Okay. And if you're like, no, but that's too big an area for the yellow, it's like, that's fine, because the orange is going to cover over it anyway. I don't need to extend it all the way up here into the sky, because if I layer yellow and blue, it'll turn into green. But all the way over here and over here, that's good. Okay, and then once I want to do the blue coming down from the top, I'll wash out my brush some. Get some blue. I will use my lighter blue here. It's just not really too dark. And I'm thinking about the sky under the clouds, because the sky under the clouds is lighter than the gray clouds themselves. Also, you're going to notice that I'm pulling my brush across here while I'm doing the wash. That's the easiest way, is pulling your brush across. And no line. it's all fuzzy. It's all nice and fuzzy. Okay, so it looks like I will probably use a little bit more blue up at the top. And it's nice and wet still, so I can just go in there with a little more blue. And I'm pulling it down. Usually for a sunset sky, the top or the part that's farthest away from the sun will end up as the darkest area. I'm going to try to feather it a little bit more so it doesn't look quite like just a chunk up there. Maybe pull some down this way a bit. Okay, while that is slightly drying, but it's not actually drying too much yet, I'm going to think about a little bit of orange, and I'm going to think about some the other cloud color. So thinking about orange, I have orange here. Of course, you can just make orange out of your yellow and your red, which I could do, right? Just put a little of the, I've already got some red and some yellow. And I can put that, uh-oh, see, it's creating a hard line, but don't worry. Don't worry. See, I'm not worried because it's pretty wet still. So what I can do is wash off my brush and then get the extra water off. So I still have plenty of water in here technically because I didn't squeeze it. And then just brush over in between the orange and the yellow area. Line, disappear. Disappear. Okay, and I'm letting the orange go up on this side a bit more. This is the area here where I want to keep it mainly yellow. Okay, and I'm also thinking about the sky. The clouds are kind of gray. If you like purple, you could use purple for that. If you like it to be a little more like a dark blue, you could do that. It's warmer, those warmer color, meaning it's more like a brown, a warmer kind of brown, particularly down at the bottom of the clouds, and then as it goes up, they get kind of cooler. So here I've got some brown. Bit of water. Oh, you can't see that. Here we go. Bit of water. Okay, and one thing to think about is where the clouds are directing themselves. See how I made it look like this? Like it's coming down? I think for composition, or how you're putting the parts of the picture together, kind of makes it look like it's pointing down to here. And the clouds that we're using there look a bit like that too. So I'm not going to do the clouds down here. That's my space for the houses. But my bottom of my clouds, hey, that's really brown, isn't it? I think that's too colorful almost. I'm going to take a little bit of my black. I would like it to be not quite as colorful, although that will work. And I am using my big brush here, but if you feel it works better with a medium brush, you can do that. Okay, so pulling some clouds in. from this side and from this side. And as I'm getting a little farther away and going up, I am actually going to make the clouds look a little cooler. So I'm taking a bit more of the black and mixing it into my brown mix here. But if you're like, no, ugly, then, do it different. Clouds coming down. Yeah, that kind of gets it. Okay, as I'm letting that sit a little bit, I'm going to try to make the clouds look a little bit more 3D by putting some shadow parts on there as well. So like doing another layer when it dries a little bit more. But if you don't like these edges, if you're like, oh, the edges, no, you can do what I did with the orange, right? I can wash out my brush. And while it is still wet, I can soften some of those edges. Now, something interesting is that our eyes tend to go to wherever the harder edges are. So if it's an area that's far away from the focal point, if you soften those edges more, it tends to make your eye go more towards wherever the harder edges are in the picture. Okay, and I'm actually just touching it with the edge of this brush, so this actually may work better for you, just but a tiny bit of water, not very much water. But since this brush is big, then I don't have to reload water on there too much, because it just kind of sucks down into the brush as I'm doing this. Oh, okay. Clouds. Okay, and then I said that I was going to do another layer. On the part of the clouds. I'm still going to use my big mop brush for it. I think I will choose the brown. Mix more brown where the light of the sun is coming up underneath, so it has a bit more of the color on there. Let's see if I've got enough color. A little black. Okay, not too much. Let's test it out and see. Okay, looking. Is it dry enough? I think so. We're not sopping wet. It is still wet enough that it will spread, and you can't always totally control it when you're trying to make things like bleed into each other. You just go for it and say, there it is. Oh, that's too wet. See, it didn't add to it. So maybe I have to wait a little bit longer. Oh, that looks like it might be dry enough right there. Okay, Let's give this a shot. I'm going to give it a shot here. Oh, yep, it's very wet. Very wet. If you find that you have to wait too long for something to dry, you can use a hair dryer. You can wave your board around. That's what I do. I'm gonna eyeball it. Okay, yeah, so when I look at it, it's still shiny. But it's kind of tricky. It's like when do I add in if I want it to be kind of wet. Let's try it. I'm going to test it again. Testing. Oh, there we go. We can see it. Okay, it'll spread out though, so give some shadows, a few more shadows. These will blend in with the clouds. Oh, that's two. On it a little, just a little. Okay, and I'm trying to keep it looking like it's going that direction, coming down, look like the clouds are pointing down. Good. Okay, but once again, I'm thinking that here, because that's a little bit more dry, I don't like how it has a hard edge up there. So I am going to wash the brush, but this time I'm going to squeeze my brush out when I do it. Okay, I know. I'm putting my stuff right on top of there. Because I don't want it to be too wet, because this is already wet. So if I add a lot more water, then okay, fuzzy fuzzy. But I'll let the bottom part there have a bit more of an edge. Yes. Good. Okay. As I'm looking at it, I think that I'm going to do a little bit of purple up in here. I think that will be fun. So blue and red. Blue and red. And just a bit. I know it's very wet still, so it's going to blend into it quite a bit, but it'll just kind of change the color slightly. Okay. Okay, It's growing kind of a hard edge up there because I added more water, and the water tends to spread out to the edge. So with a brush that's fairly dry, I squeezed it out, I will just soften. I'm going to soften that edge there. But if you're not having that issue, then you don't have to soften it up. Okay, I don't know if you like the sky like that. I do. I think that looks fun. Big billowing clouds. So right now it looks very abstract. Number one, that's what makes this type of painting a little easier. But then number two, it's like, well, what is it? If you add in what's on the ground, then suddenly it's like, oh, I know what that is. That's a sunset. And I know that there's a little bit more yellow in the clouds down here. If you want to add a little more yellow, I'm gonna touch some yellow into the clouds at the bottom. I think that makes it look more how they actually look. Okay, I have the clouds. I think the ground is fairly dry. It's not going to spread too much. If the ground seems like it's still maybe a touch wet, you can dry it before starting to work on that. But I need to switch over to a smaller brush because this is great for large areas but not good for detail. Oh, just cleaning the large brush. Squeeze the water out. Ready. Okay, I'm going to do some shaking drying. Are you entertained yet? Because it's fairly moist. It's not shiny, but I'm just worried that, it will spread, and I don't really want the houses to spread into the sky. Thinking about how high to make the houses, I don't want to cover up the yellow area that I have. I want to go just a little bit below that. And it is dark, so I can load a lot more pigment onto my brush when I do it. I know that some of the houses in there have lighter areas. You can have lighter areas on some of your houses. You can ignore that if you want. But it should be noted that actually the light areas of the houses are not really that light. So if you look at the light area of the house and then you compare it to the yellow of the sunset, that's much brighter than the white areas or the light areas on the house. So don't be afraid of making it a bit darker because it will just make more sense that way. Okay, so some water. I think I will use a brown and black mix again. Just this time I'm going to use a lot more of the black. Whoa, right? Plenty, plenty. Okay. And then wash my brush a bit, get a lot of that brown. Mix it in there. Okay, that's quite dark. I think I will add a bit of water to it because then that means I can leave some of those areas on the houses not quite so dark. I can do it in a couple of layers. Okay, yeah, so that's fairly watery, but still pretty dark. Let's give that a shot. I think that will do it. You don't have to follow the exact line of how the houses are in there if you don't want to. I'm going to make a line with like little jags going across to show the different rooftops. I think I'm going to start here and then go out and out. The reason is because I want to make sure that I'm aware of where that yellow part is and not covering it up accidentally. So if I start here and I think where are my houses in relation to the yellow area, then oh, okay, I've got it, and I don't accidentally cover it up. Okay, and dark, 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 dark. Okay, and now I'm going the other way. I'm left-handed, so then I probably naturally think go left first. You can go right first as well. That won't matter. I'm trying to do this before everything dries. Aha, okay, layer 1. I did not make the grass slightly greenish, but I can. I can do that. I'm going to do that. Okay, I'm going to use my olive green for it. And this is still kind of wet, so that's why it's like, oh, it'll go in there. Just kind of spread in. And if it's too dark, you can use just water on your brush and go over and pick up some of it. So like if I go like this, it will pick some up. But I don't really need it to be very light, so I'm going to try to put it back. Sort of. Yeah. Okay, now I'm going to let that part dry some. And, and switch to my tiny brush for detail. Feel free to make the detail how you want it to look and not necessarily exactly how those houses are in there. And I think I'm going to stick with the black and brown type mixture, but this time I'm going to go a lot darker. So remember how I had this blue here with very little water on it. I'm going to do something more like that, or like this, where I have very little water, and that way it'll darken more. Notice how right now this first layer of the houses, the darkness of the house looks similar to the darkness of some of these clouds, but I want that to end up darker, definitely darker than the clouds. So I made the first layer this way, that way I can darken it in the areas I want it to be darker and leave it this dark in the areas that I don't want it to be too dark. Okay, so I think I'm going to use this brush in order to mix the color up more here on my palette, but then use my small brush to apply it. Because if you try to mix a whole lot of color with your tiny brush, it's like, I'm mixing forever. Okay, so I brush it over the color a lot with not too much water on my brush, and then I get nice dark color. And I'm ready. House. Oh, it is a little on the wet side still. It's spreading a bit. Yeah, it's still a little on the wet side there. Okay, and if your second layer isn't dark enough, don't worry. Just wait for the second layer to dry and then add a third layer. And if the color won't spread at all, of course, just add a little water. Putting little windows on this one. Ha ha ha. It's cute. Okay. And if you run out of the color that you mix up, oh, you can't see that color mix there. If you run out of the color that you mix up, then of course just mix some more. And I can't really see windows right here, but I'm just going to imagine a few because they're fun. Okay. And I think I will create a bit more of my mix so that I can darken a few areas. Something else about watercolors is when it dries, it will tend to dry lighter than when you put it down. Part of that is because the water makes the pigment look darker on the paper, so then it dries and you're like, oh, I thought that was totally black, but now it's gray. Okay, and as I suspected, it would look good to add a little more yellow right in my yellow area, but being very careful not to mess up my houses. So I'm going just straight for the yellow with my medium brush. But I don't want a hard edge on that. I'm going to make it as if it's kind of part of the clouds. And a little orange, yellow and red. washing my brush and then just trying to touch the edges here and spread that out a bit. Yeah, so that gives it a little bit more yellow. I'll put a little more orange in here. Okay, I'm thinking almost. I'll just go over some areas on here with a bit more of the black. I'm not sure, these might be bushes over on this side. If you zoom in on the photo, you might be seeing it better than me. But I'm going to imagine those are bushes. And whatever that might be, using my imagination there. Okay, I think it is done. So we can make it a little bigger on here. There we go, the first painting of the class. What we did today, we did some wet on wet, and we layered some color in order to make certain areas darker.